the case of Nobuyuki Sato, a schoolgirl in the house as a pet. To realize that the perpetrator is a maniac is possible by the nature of his actions. As a rule, maniacs abuse, torture, and then brutally take the lives of their victims, but sometimes such abuse lasts for years or even decades. If the account of a maniac has more than 2 victims, criminalists call it a series, and the criminal himself, a serial maniac. The history of world criminalistics knows a lot of cases when maniacs did not kill their victims, but held them captive in their own homes, basements, or specially created bunkers. It is enough to remember Natasha Kampusch or Elizabeth Fritzl, who was kept by her own father in the basement of their own house for 24 years. Alas, there are many such stories, and what is most curious is that in most cases the hostages were, one might say, in full view of everyone, and the kidnappers had previously come to the attention of the police. The name of our heroine today is Fusako Sano, and she has been held captive for almost 10 years in a room whose door was never locked. One might assume that it was her story that inspired Natasha Kampusch's kidnapper, but by the time the Japanese girl's tragedy became public, the Austrian schoolgirl Natasha had already been living in captivity for a second year. But let's break down this tangled case full of drama known as the Niigata girl captivity incident from the start. Victim, Fusako Sano. A girl named Fusako Sano, later changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, was born in the small Japanese town of Mitsuke, located in Niigata Prefecture in 1980, on November 28th. She grew up in an ordinary family of average income, was a welcome and favorite child. The girl attended one of the local schools, was fond of baseball, and cheered for the local team. On November 13th, 1990, 2 weeks before her 10th birthday, Fusako, who was in the 4th grade at the time, was coming home from school. She was a little late because she had stayed to watch the school baseball game. Her parents were aware of the sporting event, so they were not particularly concerned. When the schoolgirl walked home on her usual route, it was already getting dark. On a cold autumn evening, there were almost no passers-by on the street, and rare cars were passing quickly, disappearing from sight. Suddenly, one car overtook the girl and then braked sharply and swerved in front of her. The loud squeal of brakes divided young Sano's life into before and after. Kidnapper Nobuyuki Sato. Nobuyuki Sato was born in 1962, July 15th, in the Japanese prefecture of Niigata in a wealthy family. The head of the family had its own successful business related to passenger transportation. The boy was a late child of his parents, and at the time of his birth, his father was 62 years old, and his mother was 37 years old. Nobuyuki had 5 siblings from his father's previous marriage, but he had no ties to them. The boy grew up a capricious and very spoiled child, for whom there were no inhibitions. At the same time, he was very emotional and sometimes even aggressive. If his demands were not met immediately, he could throw a tantrum, and once he threw himself at his mother with fists right in the store when she did not buy him another toy. At school, Nobuyuki had almost no friends because of his complex character, strange and sometimes inadequate behavior. It is worth noting that the boy was quite tall, which he was very embarrassed of, and all the time slouched a lot, so he received a lot of offensive nicknames. On one of the central streets of the city, the head of the family built a luxurious 2-story house in European style, where on the 2nd floor most of the part was occupied by a spacious and bright children's room for his favorite son. However, the boy did not like the room. He behaved restlessly and kept repeating that he was afraid to be there alone. Such anxious behavior and unreasonable fears became the reason to show the child to a doctor. After an initial medical examination at a regular hospital, the boy was referred to a psychiatrist for evaluation. There he was diagnosed with several disorders, including nyctophobia, fear of the dark, misophonia, fear of germs and dirt. In addition, the boy was found to have a strange combination of autophobia, fear of loneliness, and sociophobia, anxiety disorder related to social interaction. That is, he was equally afraid of and avoided both loneliness and contact with others. Nobuyuki always remained a loner. He had neither a girlfriend, despite his rather attractive appearance, nor friends. In high school, he actually became an outcast, and peers simply did not want to communicate with him. He could vent his anger, dissatisfaction with himself and others only on his own elderly parents, who forgave him everything and tried in every possible way to placate his son with gifts or money. As an adult, Sato did not stay at any job. He constantly got into trouble, conflicted with colleagues, and neglected his direct duties, because of which no one wanted to do business with him. The young man could go home in the middle of the workday just because it rained, and he felt sad about it. And once he intentionally injured a female coworker. He probably felt some kind of sympathy for her and was trying to get her attention. The incident was written off as an accident, but Sato was immediately fired. After that, he did not work anywhere else and lived on his parents' money. Gradually, the young man began to leave his room less and less often, and more often conflicts with his parents. After another such quarrel, the young man set a fire in his own home, which almost destroyed the entire house and its inhabitants. Then Sato was sent for compulsory treatment in the psychiatric clinic, where he was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder, outbursts of uncontrolled aggression, as well as signs of misogyny, acute dislike and hatred of female representatives of the female sex. He stayed in the hospital for a little over a month, after which he was discharged, having been deemed to pose no threat to others. For a while, Nobuyuki was relatively calm, and even started to rebuild the partially burned house and added a couple more rooms to it. But his efforts did not last long, and he simply abandoned the construction. The first attempted kidnapping and arrest. Sato became increasingly unsociable, sullen, and spent most of his time in his room watching TV. It should be noted that over time he stopped letting his mother and father not only into his room, but also, in principle, to the second floor. In case of violation of this boundary, he would pounce on his elderly parents with fists, shouting and threatening them with death. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began to go for walks, but he preferred to walk near one of the local schools, where he closely watched the girls. At first he behaved with restraint, did not approach, and did not try to make contact with anyone. But one day he grabbed one of the girls right at the school gate, threw her over his shoulder, and ran to his car, which he parked nearby. All this happened in front of the other children, who immediately shouted and called for help. A school security guard and a few bystanders reacted quickly and rescued the girl and detained the kidnapper before the police arrived. The girl Sato tried to kidnap was barely 9 years old. He could not explain why he had attacked the schoolgirl, so the only logical conclusion was that Sato was charged with attempting to commit unlawful acts of violence against a minor. He faced a serious prison sentence, but at his trial, which took place in August of the same year, Nobuyuki was given only a year's probation. According to some reports, his father helped him to do this by using his connections and paying a lot of money. Moreover, soon Nobuyuki's name mysteriously disappeared from the database of criminals who were prosecuted. Here, apparently, also did not do without the efforts of his father, except that the elderly man, so zealously trying to clean up the reputation of the heir, himself went to the hospital with a heart attack and died. Sato Sr. felt an acute sense of shame and pain for the monster he had raised. The kidnapping of a girl in Niigata. A year and a half after the first failed kidnapping attempt, the 28-year-old went on the hunt again. All this time, he behaved relatively calmly, did not get in the sight of the police, and the incident that occurred in the spring of 1989 near the school, safely all forgotten. On November 13th, 1990, Nobuyuki left home, got into a car, and for several hours just drove around the city. In the evening, when it was starting to get dark, he drove to a deserted road, where he soon saw a girl coming home from school. It was 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who had, to her misfortune, been delayed at a sporting event that day. There were no people or other cars nearby, no one to call for help or police. Sato braked sharply and swerved to the curb right in front of the girl. He got out of the car, knife in hand, grabbed Fusako and threatened if she tried to scream or run away, he would slit her throat. He then shoved Fusako Sano into the trunk, and after driving down the road some more, he turned onto a vacant lot. There, Nobuyuki opened the trunk again, tied the girl's hands and feet, and taped her mouth shut. When it got dark, the kidnapper drove to his house, took the captive out of the trunk, and carried her to his room, entering through an unfinished part of the dwelling to remain undetected. Then he also went back out and entered already through the door, as he always did. Nobuyuki went upstairs and, again threatening her with the knife, ordered Fusako to be quiet. He then tied her to the bed and told her that if she tried to leave the room or even look out the window, scream or cry, he would kill her and throw her body into the ocean so that no one would ever find it. The schoolgirl was scared to death and did everything the kidnapper said, still hoping that he would take pity and let her go. The search for the missing girl. When Fusako didn't come home from school, her parents began to worry. They knew her daughter would stay late after school to watch a baseball game, but it was getting dark outside, and she should have been home a long time ago. At first, the Sano couple tried to find their daughter on their own, following her usual route from home to school, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Closer to night, the parents of the schoolgirl appealed to the police, hoping that the girl will be found quickly, because from the moment of her disappearance has passed only a few hours. Police squads began the search, and by morning they were joined by dozens of volunteers from among local residents. The next day, more than 200 people took part in the search operation, combing the area, pasting flyers with photos of the missing girl and interviewing passers-by in search of random witnesses. Notably, Nobuyuki lived very close to the girl's school and near the police station. Moreover, he had previously come to the attention of the police for attempting to kidnap the girl. But despite all this, Nobuyuki was not even a suspect in the case, thanks to the efforts of his late father, who made sure that his son's name did not appear in the criminal database. The massive search lasted for many months, checking numerous empty buildings, structures, trailers, and railroad cars, searching suspicious vehicles, combing vacant lots and interstate highways. But despite all the efforts, no traces or clues to the schoolgirl's whereabouts were found. The most different, even unlikely versions were being worked out, among which there was a suggestion that representatives of North Korean special services were involved in the abduction of the Japanese girl. However, as time went on, the search was not successful, and Fusako Sano was still considered missing, captured by a maniac. As Fusako herself later admitted, she was scared to death at first and did everything her captor told her, hoping that in time he would take pity on her and let her go. But Nobuyuki didn't even think of letting his captive go. For the first few months, he bound her hands and feet tightly, so tightly that the blood flow was impaired, causing her to lose some sensation in her limbs. In case of the slightest disobedience or violation of silence, the torturer used a stun gun as punishment, beat Fusako on the head and body with his fists, or threatened her with a knife. At the same time, Nobuyuki never once took advantage of his victim in an intimate way during his imprisonment. He was not attracted to her as a woman, but rather something between a living toy and a pet to talk to. Nobuyuki Sato fed the prisoner once or twice a day with food prepared by his mother, who lived on the first floor. Because of this meager diet, the girl was weakened and severely malnourished. He forbade her to get out of bed, and she had to go to the bathroom in plastic bags, which the man then took to the unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he bathed Fusako in a basin, cut her hair and nails himself, and dressed her in his own shabby clothes. But even if she behaved quietly and did not break the kidnapper's rules, he still beat her regularly for fun and practiced various fighting techniques on her. After a few years, Fusako was finally broken psychologically, complied with all the demands of her tormentor, and did not even try to run or look out the window. Sato stopped tying her up when he went somewhere else and didn't even lock the door of his room. He simply made the bed with the prisoner lying there and threw a couple of blankets or towels on top, so that at first glance it looked like there was nothing underneath. As time went on, Nobuyuki began to turn on Fusako's radio periodically and allowed her to watch television with him. However, they watched only scotchki or some sports matches, something that was interesting to Nobuyuki himself. He also brought her comic books, which he adored. It was the only thing Fusako had read in her years of confinement. For almost 10 years, she had seen no other people but her captor, had never spoken to anyone, and had never left the confines of her room. In fact, she was on the bed all the time, and hardly moved at all. The girl was so resigned to her fate that she did not even try to resist, escape, or make herself known. Mother abuse and police indifference. Nobuyuki's mother lived on the first floor of the house and for years had not entered her son's room because he threatened to beat her if she broke the ban. The woman knew her spoiled and violent son all too well, so she followed his rules. After Nobuyuki put a prisoner in the room, he forbade the mother to even go up to the second floor, and when she once tried to do so, he simply pushed the elderly mother down the stairs. She worked as much as she could and tried to stay home as little as possible. But when she retired in 1996, at the age of 73, her life became simply unbearable. Her son regularly abused his mother, beat her, and forced her to follow a series of rules he had invented. Finally, the elderly woman could not stand it, and in the spring of 1996 went to the police, where she wrote a statement that she was a victim of domestic violence by her own son. But the police, apparently, did not want to deal with the case, and therefore persuaded Mrs. Sato to withdraw her statement and independently deal with the family problems. The pensioner also twice applied for consultation to the public health center, where she complained about her son's inadequate and aggressive behavior and asked to hospitalize him in a psychiatric hospital. But even here, she was refused, considering such a reason not serious enough and advising her to persuade her son to go to the clinic for help himself. Almost 4 years later, in January 2000, the exhausted elderly woman, after another beating, called the hospital and asked for a medical team to be sent to her house, as well as representatives of law enforcement, because her son was holding her tied up and had tasered her several times. An unexpected discovery. This time, the officials finally responded to the pensioner's complaints and went to the address. When the ambulance and police car arrived at the house, Nobuyuki became visibly nervous. He began to behave aggressively, resisted, and tried to fight. Because of this inappropriate behavior, he had to be handcuffed, and the medics injected him with a large dose of sedatives. The beaten elderly woman admitted that she was afraid of her son, whose behavior was becoming more and more aggressive and uncontrollable. She also said that she had not gone up to the second floor of the house for many years because the air forbade her to do so, threatening to kill her. The police officers decided to check the second floor and Nobuyuki's room. As soon as they entered, they noticed a pile of blankets lying on the bed, which suddenly moved slightly. Pulling back the blankets, the police officers were dumbfounded to see a very thin, pale, and exhausted girl underneath them. When they asked her who she was and how she came to be here, she very quietly gave her name and said that she had been kidnapped on her way home from school a long time ago. After the gruesome discovery, Nobuyuki's mother was brought into the room and asked her if she knew the girl. But the woman was very surprised and claimed that she had no idea that anyone other than her and her son lived in their house. The captive also confirmed that she had never seen the woman before. Confessions of a maniac. The same day Nobuyuki was brought to the station for questioning, and what he told literally shocked the police officers. He remembered in detail the day he was driving along the road and saw Fusako. According to the detainee, he thought the girl was very cute and wanted to take her home with him. Sato claimed that he took care of her. He fed her, washed her, dressed her, and read her comic books, and punished her only for disobedience. He also admitted that he loved his captive as a friend, and she seemed to love him too. He had no intention of ever letting her go, and hoped she would stay with him for life. He loved spending time with her. He could talk to the girl for hours about skaks, soccer, music, or his favorite comic book characters, and she would listen silently. He added that he never locked his bedroom door, but Fusako never tried to escape, which he concluded meant she liked living with him. Consequences, trial, and sentence. After a medical examination, the doctors concluded that, despite his mental disorder, Sato was able to recognize his actions and could therefore stand trial. His mother could be involved as an accomplice, because the elderly woman, at the request of her son, regularly bought feminine hygiene products in the supermarket and could suspect something wrong. But it was taken into account the fact that she repeatedly contacted the police and medical institutions, but her requests to visit the family home were ignored. The case was widely publicized even before the trial began, and the city police were strongly criticized. because Nobuyuki had been previously prosecuted for attempted kidnapping of a schoolgirl, but when he brought his plan to the end, he remained above suspicion. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department, who failed to control the situation from the beginning and made a lot of mistakes, were removed from their posts. Nobuyuki Sato was brought to trial in May 2000. All his actions, and even the smallest offenses, were studied in detail and attached to the case because the prosecutors tried to achieve for the kidnapper of the maximum possible punishment. As a result, Sato was found guilty and sentenced to 14 years in prison. Such a term was considered the maximum. He was released in the spring of 2015. By that time, his mother had long died in a home for the elderly, and Nobuyuki had no other relatives. He himself was found dead a year and a half later in early 2017 in a small rented room. The cause of his death was not disclosed. How did the girl's life turn out? At the time of her discovery, Fusako was so weak that she could barely stand on her feet. Doctors diagnosed her with exhaustion and dehydration, and her muscles were practically atrophied. In addition to stuttering, frightened of sunlight, and practically lost her communication skills. When her parents saw their daughter for the first time after nearly a decade apart, they didn't even recognize her. It took the girl about a year to more or less recover physically, but her mental health took much longer to recover. Fusako Sano had severe post-traumatic stress disorder, shunned people, and her intelligence remained at the level of a 9-10-year-old child. Her parents took their daughter out of town. She changed her name to Sachiko Yamada and flatly refused to talk to the press. Over time, she made friends, took up photography, and even passed her driver's license test. Unfortunately, in 2007, she suffered another shock when her father drowned in front of her eyes during a family trip to a pond. Did you know that along with criminology, the science of crime, there is also victimology? This is a field of study that is at the intersection of criminology, psychology, and sociology, and deals with the study of crime victims. It turns out that there are certain predispositions of people to have a crime committed against them. These factors include social status, life experiences, and, of course, psychological characteristics. The worse the social conditions of life, the higher the risk of becoming a victim. At the same time, the higher the social status, the greater the chances of encountering fraud, extortion, and kidnapping. As far as personal experience is concerned, it is simple. People who know how to deal with their surroundings, circumstances are safer, unlike others. Personality traits are probably the defining condition in this list. What kind of character a person possesses determines his or her life position and, consequently, victimization. The case that happened in 1995 in New York is about sacrifice and openness to the world, which became fatal for 21-year-old Kimberly Antonakos. The heroine of today's story is a beautiful girl with a good heart who could not have imagined even in a terrible dream what horror life has prepared her. Thomas Antonakos, a successful businessman and a wonderful father, learned about the disappearance of his daughter from her colleagues. The girl's co-workers contacted him when Kimberly failed to show up for work on the first spring day. She was very punctual and was in good standing with management, so her absence was considered a bad sign, and they were right. The assumption that the employee was ill was dispelled. The worried father also said that he had not been able to call Kim since last night and had a premonition of trouble. His girl was always in touch because he made her a rare and expensive gift for those times, a cell phone. But she didn't answer the phone, so the man was forced to contact her friends. However, they did not help him. No one has seen Kimberly since she left the party in the early morning hours of March 1st. The grieving father decided not to wait and went to the police. Only after learning that the young woman was wanted, law enforcement officials suggested waiting at least 24 hours. It is quite possible that she spent the night at someone's house and will soon make herself known. She was already an adult and could do what she wanted. This attitude to the case did not satisfy Thomas, so he organized his own investigation. Remarkably, but the light on the story of Kimberly's disappearance was shed by a psychic. A person with supernatural abilities was approached by the girl's mother. The woman flew from Florida as soon as she learned about what had happened. In despair, on the advice of a friend, she decided to use all possibilities. Psychic at the sight of the photo of Kim reported that she is still alive, but very weak and dehydrated. She also said that the girl was kidnapped by acquaintances and tried to escape more than once. Finally, she added that the deadly danger comes from several people, and the name of one of them begins with the letter J. Apparently, this is the ringleader of the gang. This information was later made public and caused not only a public outcry, but also unavoidable consequences. However, let's start at the beginning. Kimberly was born in 1974 in New York, USA. She was the only child in the family. Despite the fact that the girl grew up in love and affluence, she was not pampered. Her parents came from simple families. Nevertheless, her father Thomas managed to achieve considerable heights. He created his own company, which was engaged in computers. Earned funds, the man was happy to spend on his favorite daughter and her desires. When Kim was a little girl, the couple Antonakos divorced. The child was left to live with his mother. However, this did not weaken the connection between the little girl and her father. He took her on weekends and spent all his free time with her. When Kimberly's mother found a new man and decided to move to Florida, the girl faced a choice: to stay with her mother or with her father. Since she did not want to move and with her dad felt as wonderful as with her mom, the young lady preferred to live in familiar conditions. So Kim began living with her father, with whom she was very close. She grew up a well-mannered and sociable child. Over the years, she became a bright beauty. Her dazzling smile always lifted her spirits, and in general, she was distinguished by a sense of humor and positivity. Since childhood, she was surrounded by care, protected from trouble. Therefore, Kimberly saw only good in all people. Immediate problems bypassed her, in connection with which she was only heard about the dark side of life. Unfortunately, an open and kind soul brings a lot of sorrows to its owner. In 1994, the girl became a student at the College of Staten Island. A little later, she informed her father that she felt old enough to live independently. Undoubtedly, Mr. Antonakos was concerned about her decision, but respected it and decided not to oppose it. Then he promised himself to secure her separate living arrangements as much as possible. Therefore, Thomas purchased a nice apartment for his daughter in an affluent area of the city. He even equipped his daughter's dwelling with an alarm system. Not wanting her to park far from home, the man bought a space in the garage across the street. And to keep her in constant communication, she had a cell phone and a pager. Everything that was up to the father, he did to the highest standard. His concern for Kim's safety had good reason. It had to do with his affluence and the girl's little worldly experience. Kimberly not only did well in school, but also worked part-time. She refused her father's offer to continue the family business because she wanted to find her own way. So Kimberly took a part-time job as an accountant at a successful firm. At this time, she lived an ordinary student life, often entertained, attended parties. Her father repeatedly offered to return, but she refused. Her desire to be independent led to an unexpected denouement. In early 1995, Kimberly sheltered in her home friend Liz Pace and her family. Their apartment was being renovated. Out of the kindness of her heart, Kimberly offered her spacious lodging. The young people had fun. They cooked together and spent evenings together. On one such day, Kimberly and her friend decided to go to a party. The girls put on makeup, did their hair, and picked out suitable outfits, after which they went to the party. According to Liz, they had a good time. They had fun and danced. Afterwards, Kimberly drove them home in her white 1994 Honda Accord. However, she did not go up to the apartment, citing unfinished business. The girls embraced and never saw each other again. The first place Mr. Antonakos went to after the police was the parking lot next to his daughter's house. However, the car was missing from the garage. On the floor near the wall, the man noticed a shiny object. It turned out to be a small gold earring. The father remembered that he had given his daughter similar ones, and just in case he took them with him. Kimberly wasn't in the apartment either. He only came across guests, a friend, her boyfriend Joshua Torres, and their joint 2-year-old child. Thomas was aware of the decision, but was not in favor of it. The tenants were also surprised by the absence of the hostess and worried about her. Joshua reported that he was looking for Kimberly and volunteered to help. Later, Thomas came to the police station again. He stated that his daughter had had an accident, but the officers remained adamant. The unhappy father decided to communicate again with Liz, who was the last person to see Kim. The man showed the found jewelry. The girl confirmed that she had seen those earrings on Kim the night of the disappearance. Next, Mr. Antonakos visited the places where his daughter often went. There he talked to many people but did not learn anything important. Joshua, in turn, offered to look not only for Kimberly, but also for the car, which was very conspicuous. Then Thomas went to the police for the third time. This time, he was determined. Therefore, he informed the law enforcement officers that he would not go anywhere until they went on a search. One of the detectives responded to the appeal of the agitated father. He said that despite the protocol, he would take up the investigation. The first thing he did was to reconstruct the events of February 28th. Miss Antonakos went to college in the morning, then to work afterward. After working a few hours, she came home. There, together with friends, she had dinner and then attended a party with Liz. Around 4 a.m., the girls arrived home. After that, Jim went to the parking lot. What urgent business she had at such an early time, it was not possible to find out. In the apartment and garage of the missing was searched, but no evidence or traces indicating a struggle were found. No foreign fingerprints were found either. Either someone made an effort to clean them, or the intruder acted with gloves. The car and driver seemed to have vanished without a trace. The only concern was the earring that was found. The girl's bank account was also analyzed. It was found that the last time she used the bank card was the evening before her disappearance. Therefore, the theory of running away from home was ruled out. The detective's theory was that Kimberly had been kidnapped. At this point, other police officers joined the investigation. For lack of other solid leads, law enforcement unofficially adhered to the information that Mrs. Antonakos received from the psychic. By the way, it is not uncommon for authorities to cooperate with people who have psychic abilities. Sometimes such involvement has positive results, but it is simply not publicized en masse. Witness interviews followed. The first people interviewed were Liz and Joshua. Officers learned that 65 calls had been made from Kimberly's landline on the morning of March 1st. This surprised detectives. However, Joshua explained that he had been calling all of his friends and acquaintances, hoping to figure out where Kim had gone and why she hadn't spent the night at home. According to him, she was like a little sister to him. Thanks to Liz's testimony, it was possible to determine what clothes Kim was wearing. A portrait was drawn up, which was to be published. A distinctive note on the girl's body were tattoos. One of them was in the form of a scorpion, her zodiac sign. The other was located on the waist and represented an infinity sign in the form of two naked people. In parallel, there was a search for the missing car. Were checked all the scrapped metal collection points, as well as other places where the vehicle could be in order to disassemble for parts or sale. However, there was no positive result. A check of the girl's cell phone was also unsuccessful. Police officers told Thomas that he should have paid attention to the letters and phone calls he was receiving, as his daughter's kidnappers could have contacted him and offered a ransom. However, the Antonakos family remained in limbo until March 4th. Around 2 a.m., emergency services received a report of a fire. A large abandoned house was burning at 86 Woodhaven Avenue in Queens. Several fire crews were involved in putting it out. When the fire was finally extinguished, a charred body was found in the basement of the building. Forensic experts found out that the deceased was a woman of 25 years old. On her head survived a part of black long hair. There were also traces of tape. The poor woman's legs were bound and her hands were tied behind her back. However, the worst part of the story was something else. She was alive at the time of the fire, as evidenced by her smoke-filled lungs. In fact, the young woman was burned alive. Detectives hypothesized that the body found belonged to the missing Kimberly. However, dental records were needed for a full identification. At the same time, the ashes were inspected. The smell of gasoline could also be smelled in the air. It was obvious that the house had been set on fire. Apparently, someone had decided to destroy evidence of a serious crime, and indeed, there were no traces except for the charred body. Examining the charred corpse, the specialists also found tattoos matching the description of the missing woman. The records that came from the dental clinic confirmed the suspicions of the investigation. That's how Kimberly Antonakos' body was found. Later, other circumstances of the case became known. One of the eyewitnesses of the fire reported that he often walked with his dog. However, the pet had been behaving strangely in recent days. It was nervous and barked at the house. It was unclear what could have caused this reaction. After the fire and the discovery of the body, it became clear what so attracted the attention of the dog. The girl tried to free herself and called for help. With its acute hearing, the dog heard the sounds coming from the basement while they were inaccessible to human perception. When the officers questioned the owner, it turned out that he had visited the building more than once in recent days. The fact is that he put the house for sale and monitored its condition, and also picked up the mail and receipts. However, the man did not look into the basement, inspecting the house only from the outside. As the homeowner admitted, he never heard the suspicious noise, otherwise he would have paid attention to it. The man was clearly shocked by what happened. The investigators decided to question Joshua again, something they didn't like about the guy. In addition, by a strange coincidence, his name began with the letter J. This time, Joshua talked about the guy he hadn't reached the day Kimberly disappeared. It was a young man nicknamed Psycho, a Russian national who had once dated Kimberly. Detectives decided to verify the information. They determined that the Russian had moved to the United States with his parents as a young child. Having grown up, he became a member of a gang and repeatedly broke the law. So, in the case appeared the first suspect, who was soon detained. During the interrogation, Psycho became aware of the death of a former lover. However, his reaction shocked the detectives. The young man did not just claim that he was not involved in the crime. He was heartbroken. It was clear that he was experiencing genuine emotions. Investigators also wanted to see how he would behave at a crime scene, so they took him to the scene of the tragedy. There, everyone was convinced that they had the wrong man in custody. In addition, after some time, the guy's alibi was confirmed. Once again, the investigation was deadlocked. The victim's family decided to turn to the psychic once again. This time, the psychic said that she saw 4 people involved in the crime. She also said that the kidnappers wanted to establish contact, but they failed to do so. Allegedly, the kidnapping itself did not initially suggest a sad ending. "The denouement is coming soon," the fortune teller summarized. A couple days later, hoping to get some information, the missing woman's father announced a $10,000 reward to anyone who would help catch the culprit. Mr. Antonakos could not forget the words spoken by the clairvoyant. If he had been told earlier that he would rely on some fortune tellers and soothsayers, he would never have believed it. But grief makes a man suggestible. The man went over in his mind her words about her daughter's kidnappers wanting to get in touch. What did that mean, and what prevented them? Then he returned home and sat down at the table. He stared at his phone for a long time as he suddenly remembered a minor point. On the day Kimberly disappeared, he had listened to all the answering machine recordings, as he had been expecting his girl to contact him. However, there had been no voicemails, except perhaps 2 blank ones. When he turned them on, he heard nothing. There was dead silence on the other end of the handset, so he mistook them for some sort of device malfunction or communication problems. However, it later turned out that this was not the case. 5 days after the girl's body was discovered, officers managed to locate her car. It was parked in a fairly quiet area of town, not far from the crime scene. The investigation hoped to find fingerprints in the car. However, the vehicle was well washed. The only evidence was Kimberly's hair and the second earring in the passenger compartment. It seemed like a breakthrough in the investigation, but it did not happen. At the same time, Kimberly's father was being implicated in a local mob hit. Allegedly, such a rich and successful man was clearly connected with the criminal world. Some of the man's entourage even blamed him for the death of his daughter, as if his dark deeds had brought trouble on his daughter. The grief-stricken father denied any involvement. Detectives, through their own channels, managed to verify the information floating around. It was not confirmed. Thomas was clean and conducted his business openly. In July 1995, a young man was arrested by the police in a New York City home for burglary. Unexpectedly, he provided information concerning the case of Miss Antonakos. The detainee claimed that he had heard from an acquaintance that his friends had kidnapped and then burned the girl. When the officers heard the name of the unidentified man, the picture of the crime finally emerged. It was none other than Joshua Torres, the same guy who lived in Kimberly's apartment and helped in the search for her. Detectives decided to take a closer look at him. The young man was called back in for questioning. He denied any involvement in the crime. However, during a long conversation, he gave himself away. Torres said that if he had been the kidnapper, he would have fed Kim. Detectives latched onto that line because there was no coverage of the victim dying of hunger, thirst, or cold. No one outside the investigation knew that, not even her father. However, they needed more evidence, and it didn't take them long. Officers looked into the identity of the new suspect. It was found that the guy had a criminal record and was repeatedly attracted. In addition, he did not work anywhere and lived at the expense of his roommate Liz. While the girl worked, he took care of the child. Having free time allowed him to plan the crime in peace. He knew Kimberly's routine, could track her down and hide her in an abandoned house. Then why didn't he demand a ransom? Something must have gone wrong, so the unsub got rid of Kim. The calls Torres made that morning were analyzed. It became obvious that the guy was lying when he said he was calling Kimberly's contacts. Most of the numbers belonged to random people with no connection to Kimberly. After examining his pager data, it was discovered that the guy had sent some strange messages on March 1st. The ring around Joshua was gradually closing. He had been suspicious to detectives for a long time. Finally, they got solid leads to apprehend him. They admitted to him that they no longer considered Kimberly's ex-boyfriend a suspect. And once again, they pressed the case intelligently. That's when Torres said he suspected his friends of massacring the girl. He pleaded guilty to accessory to kidnapping. At the same time, he said that he did not think that his comrades would eventually decide to get rid of a common friend. According to him, they just wanted to get the ransom and then let the victim go. But the plan didn't work. The kidnappers wondered why their calls went ignored by Mr. Antonakos. It turns out that they did make contact with Kimberly's father and even recorded a message to ransom her. However, the recording of the conversation was not saved on the answering machine for some reason. The kidnappers were angered by the father's inaction and decided to wait for further developments in the case. It turns out that they were frightened not only by the publicity, but also by the words of the clairvoyant that the suspect's name begins with the letter J. This information was not only published in the media, but also broadcast on TV with reference to an additional unofficial source of information. It's a mystical, vicious circle. One action spawned another. After speaking with the police, Joshua was released on bail and then disappeared. At the same time, his accomplice Jose was shot in the back of the head while walking with his wife. His wife later admitted to investigators that her husband did not trust Joshua, used a tape recorder when talking to him, and wanted to expose him. She claimed he felt guilty about kidnapping Kimberly, but he didn't set the house on fire, and soon wanted to confess everything to the police as he had confessed to her. Thanks to the pager messages and the suspect's statements, investigators established the details of the kidnapping and the crime. Thus it was found that 4 men were involved: Joshua Torres, Julio Negron, Jose Negron, Julio's namesake, and Nicholas Brett, nicknamed Jay. Notably, Julio dated Kimberly for a while and even wanted to marry her, but she rejected his proposal. The young people were united by the fact that they were friends and had a criminal past behind them. However, it did not compare to what the guys did to the poor girl. Nicholas had been released on bail shortly before the kidnapping. Thanks to his mother, he got off with a small fine for a crime that could have sentenced him to more than a year in prison. As for Joshua, at a young age, he was involved in cases of child abduction, violence against a minor, illegal carrying of weapons. However, he too was limited to a light sentence for the acts committed. The initiator of the crime was undoubtedly him. It was Joshua who coordinated the group's actions. After Kimberly returned from the party, the men grabbed her in the parking lot. Apparently, they'd been following her and waiting for the perfect moment to leave her alone. A gun was used for intimidation. Kim resisted, so her hands were tied and her mouth, eyes, and even ears were covered with duct tape. After that, the bandits put the girl in the trunk and drove her to an abandoned house. There, they took the unfortunate woman to the basement and tied her to a chair. They even removed her shoes so that she would not attract attention to herself by tapping her feet. Before this, the young men told Kimberly that her father owed money and they would release her after he had paid them. Julio was supposed to look after the girl, bring her food and water twice a day, and make sure she was warm. However, he was afraid of the consequences and left the house. As it happened, the victim did not eat or drink for 3 days, and also froze from the cold. As soon as the abductee was left alone, the perpetrators informed Joshua. He made an audio recording in which he demanded $75,000 as ransom. Then the guy called the girl's father and left 2 messages, which later turned out to be empty, so they were not taken into account by Mr. Antimakos. The kidnappers waited for news and sincerely did not understand why Kim's father did not get in touch with them. During this time, Kimberly, left unattended, passed out from dehydration more than once, but she was still fighting for life. The intruders were angry that they had not received the ransom, and they were afraid of being caught, so they decided to let her go. When they went down to the basement, they found the girl unconscious. Deciding that Kimberly was dead, they thought of nothing better than to get rid of all the evidence, and at the same time of the hostage. In talking to Liz, the officers discovered that Joshua had used his roommate as an alibi. He directed the actions of the accomplices while in the house with the child. Liz claimed that at first she did not even realize that her boyfriend had kidnapped Kimberly. Later at trial, Liz testified against him. She said that after the interrogation, Joshua came to her and confessed to everything. After that, he beat her and silenced her, threatened to kill her, and soon went on the run. Sometime later, the perpetrator was arrested. He was also suspected of killing Jose, however, there was no direct evidence of this. Investigators decided to confront the former friends. They informed them that Joshua denied his involvement in the massacre. When Julio learned about it, he cooperated with the investigation and told everything. This allowed Torres to be convicted of Kimberly's murder. As a result, the trio was charged with murder, arson, kidnapping, and holding a person against his will. During the trial, it was found that Joshua had repeatedly tried to mislead the investigation and avoid punishment. The jury deliberated for about 10 hours. In the end, Joshua Torres was sentenced to 58 years in prison. Nicholas Brett received the same sentence. Julio Negron was only found guilty of accessory after the fact. As such, he was sentenced to between 2 and 6 years in prison. Tomas Antonakos was satisfied with the verdict of the court. He did not want the criminals to be sentenced to death. In his opinion, it would have been the lightest punishment. It is known that Nicholas was repeatedly abused and assaulted in prison. And after 2 years in prison, he died of AIDS. Julio was released after 2 years, having served his sentence. Joshua will not be released until 2053 at the earliest, if he lives to see it. Sadly, in 2005, the victim's father died of cancer. His family is sure that the disease provoked the terrible death of his daughter. This is how unexpectedly cut short the life of a beautiful girl, Kimberly Antonakos. Whether excessive good-naturedness the cause of her premature departure, it is difficult to judge. However, if she had been more prudent and choosy in her surroundings, perhaps she would have lived a long and happy life. Good always triumphs over evil, even in a case like this. The trial that took place and life afterward set things right. The perpetrators of the tragedy are severely punished and are unlikely to ever forget what they have done. Let's visit the small and picturesque town of Griffin, located in the state of Georgia, in the southeastern United States of America. Rightfully considered one of Georgia's oldest towns, Griffin was founded in 1840 and has since played a significant role in the state's history. All this influence of the past can be seen in its architecture and preserved monuments. The historical center of the town is imbued with the spirit of antiquity, where old brick buildings intertwine with modernity. Its rich history, stunning architecture, beautiful parks, and a variety of flavors make it a true gem of the South in the United States. Today, our story is full of intrigue and unexpected twists of fate, at the end of which
each of you will ask yourself one question: where is the truth? Mary Catherine never thought that one careless act would lead to such terrible consequences. When the judge entered the courtroom, a special atmosphere of tension and anticipation appeared in the room. Everyone present focused and froze in anticipation of the verdict. The attorneys have done a tremendous amount of work, provided accurate arguments, and in case of an unexpected verdict, they already plan their performance and are ready for appeals and objections. The judge gives the floor to the jury, and they announce their verdict. At the end of a week-long trial and a 4-hour jury deliberation, Mary Catherine was found not guilty and acquitted on all charges. But let's return to this joyful note to the origins of the story and try to understand together what led the young woman to the defendant's bench and whether it could have been prevented. Stephen Andrew Freeman was born on January 1st, 1995, in Thomaston, Georgia, to Troy and Jennifer Freeman. He and his brother Blake grew up as happy, healthy children without any problems with their parents or society. Kind and responsive, Stephen had many friends. Everyone described him as an exceptionally calm and balanced person. Stephen grew up in Griffin, where he later attended Spalding High School and Gordon State College to complete his education. Mary Catherine Higdon was also raised in a respectable family, somewhat carefree, impetuous, humorous, friendly. She was drawn to creativity. She often put on mini-plays and performed them in front of her family and neighbors. Mary and Stephen fell in love with each other in their senior years and have been inseparable since. The young couple had a lot of common interests. Both loved being in nature. They went hiking, fishing, and even hunting together. In 2012, Stephen Freeman updated his Facebook status to say he was in a relationship and regularly posted various photos with his beloved. Mary's family was fond of her boyfriend. Steve's parents, in turn, also accepted his girlfriend as their own daughter. After graduating from school, the young people moved in together. Stephen got a job as a plumber at Drainwright Gutters and Roofing Inc., and Mary Catherine worked as a teacher's assistant at St. George's Episcopal School. She also worked part-time as a salesperson at a gun store. By the summer of 2018, Stephen and Mary had been living together for 7 years, but had not gotten married. On August 1st, 2018, at 10:42 p.m., emergency services received an alarm call. The caller, 24-year-old Mary Catherine Higdon, screamed hysterically into the phone that she had accidentally shot her boyfriend. She reported grabbing a Glock 43 firearm, unaware that there was a bullet in the chamber. When paramedics and police arrived at Sunnybrook Drive, the girl was in a state of shock. She knelt in front of the motionless and bloodied body of the young man lying on the bed, crying incessantly, gasping and begging the doctors to help him. "I can't lose him. I can't lose him," she cried hoarsely. Law enforcement officers struggled to pull Mary Catherine away from the victim to examine him and provide first aid. 23-year-old Stephen Freeman, wounded in the chest just below the neck, was still breathing. He was immediately transported to Spalding Regional Hospital. Unfortunately, a few minutes before midnight, the young man's heart stopped. Not fully comprehending the tragedy that had occurred, and still in shock, Mary had to visit the police station to give her account of the events. She was called in for questioning, where the girl, still completely stunned, claimed that the shot was accidental. She explained that there had always been firearms in their home, and that Stephen would leave a pistol on the nightstand for self-defense before going to sleep, as their house was located outside the city. On that fateful evening, she merely wanted to hand Stephen the pistol, and it accidentally discharged. She had no idea the gun was loaded. Mary Catherine insisted that Stephen Freeman was the love of her life. She would never harm him, especially not intentionally. Examining the scene, investigators did not rule out the possibility that the act might have been premeditated, and they had substantial arguments to support this theory. There were signs of a struggle in the kitchen, with food and dishes scattered about. Detectives Adam Trammell and Chris Wilson found Mary's story improbable and continued the investigation, examining the evidence. Mary Catherine was called in for a second interrogation,
where the investigators employed pressure tactics. They yelled at the suspect, expressed disbelief in her story, and demanded the truth. It worked. Mary Catherine confessed to shooting her boyfriend in anger. She shared that they had a severe argument, and she wanted to leave him. Having recorded the conversation, the investigators had an admission of guilt, indicating a case solved with a heartfelt confession. However, a serious technical problem arose, causing most of the recording to be lost, save for interference and indistinct noises. How this happened was unexplainable, as was the reason why no one thought to make a backup copy of this crucial piece of evidence. Further investigation revealed that the pistol could not have fired accidentally, as it required a trigger pull. Moreover, for the bullet to hit Stephen as it did, the pistol had to be pointed at the victim. Detectives also questioned Mary's behavior. Some suspected she was overacting, demonstrating her distress in an exaggerated manner. The detectives didn't stop for a moment, piecing together their version of the tragedy with new evidence and proof. Another critical fact cast doubt on the accident and Mary Catherine's words. Investigators learned that the girl worked at a gun store, where employees undergo thorough training on handling various firearms before starting work. This meant she undoubtedly knew how to safely hand over a pistol without causing harm. The picture of an accident didn't align with the new facts that the investigation uncovered. The woman changed her statement several times. Sometimes her hysterical state interrupted the interrogation, but she reiterated time and again that it was an accident. However, in another conversation, Mary Catherine let slip to the police that at Stephen's request she tossed the pistol to hand it to him, and the weapon accidentally discharged. This didn't match what she told investigators of the scene and during the first interrogation. Back then, Mary repeatedly stated that she was simply handing Stephen the pistol hand to hand, not tossing it, and that's when it accidentally fired below his neck. These changing statements worked against Mary Catherine, as she was caught lying, and every word was scrutinized for hidden intent, indicating guilt concealment. Mary was detained and remained in Spalding County Jail during the trial.
She was charged with felony murder, malice murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. Lieutenant Wilson vehemently contested Mary's claim of it being an accident and tried to prove her guilt in a deliberate and meticulously planned act. A new piece of evidence in this case was common cooking grease found on the slide of the pistol. The slide also had lubricant, suggesting that at some point the magazine must have been emptied. Bullets were loaded, inserted back into the pistol, and placed on a shelf. In her defense, Mary Catherine told the police that she indeed was preparing dinner for Stephen that evening, the very dinner that was found scattered on the kitchen floor, explaining the presence of grease on the slide. Subsequent interrogations of the couple's relatives and friends did not provide the clarity expected in this case. Many friends claimed that this teenage love turned into a roller coaster ride for Stephen and Mary until the very end. Their relationship, at times nearly ending, then reigniting with new passion, became genuinely complicated in recent years. The lovers often quarreled over emerging disagreements. Mary turned every argument into a drama. She screamed at Stephen and attacked him, after which he often left the house to spend the night with friends, turning off his phone as Mary continued to call and text him. She tried to control his every move, driving Stephen to frustration. The guy shared with friends that Mary, during arguments and fights, pointed the pistol at him or herself, threatening to end her life or his. Stephen never reported this to the police, fearing Mary would be jailed. And this was not the only instance when Mary resorted to using a weapon. And there were plenty of weapons in their home. During an interrogation, Stephen's friend Thomas Skinner shared that 2 days before the tragedy, on July 30th, 2018, Stephen and Mary Catherine exchanged warm messages, wishing each other a good day. The next day, July 31st, Stephen told his mother that he would not return home to that devil and stayed the night at Thomas's place. On August 1st, 2018, when Stephen didn't come home to sleep, Mary sent him hundreds of messages begging him to return. That evening, she prepared dinner and waited for her beloved. From Stephen's mother, she learned he was at his friend Thomas's place and went to pick him up. She encountered them on the road and, rolling down the window, shouted that she was waiting for him at home for dinner. Stephen replied that he was coming home. The evening, instead of a reconciliatory dinner, ended in tragedy. The police believed the case was closed as a premeditated act, driven by Mary Catherine's anger. But her defense team revealed another side to the young couple's life, known to few. On June 17, 2019, almost a year after Stephen's death, his beloved Mary Catherine Higdon stood trial. Before the hearing, Mary Higdon was offered a plea deal for life imprisonment with the possibility of parole if she pled guilty. However, she refused the deal, insisting she could never harm Stephen because he was the love of her life. At the initial hearings, Mary Higdon defended herself vehemently. She repeatedly claimed it was an accident and that she loved Stephen Freeman. She also surprised many by accusing her boyfriend of abusive behavior towards her. She claimed he hit her twice and even forced himself on her. On the day of the tragedy, he allegedly attacked her, and she had to defend herself. It turned out the couple's relationship had been deteriorating over some time. Friends and relatives claimed Mary Higdon was furious because Stephen often ignored her messages and calls. She demanded attention and pursued him, especially insistently lately.
Allegedly, on the night of the act, when Stephen Freeman finally came home, he refused to eat the dinner Mary had prepared for him, which became the last straw for her. She couldn't hold back and fired at him. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard stated in court that there was physical evidence supporting that Mary Catherine shot Stephen in anger after he didn't come home for dinner and ignored her calls and text messages. As physical evidence, the grease found on the pistol and the sheet taken from the mattress where Stephen lay bleeding were presented. The sheet was shown as a key piece of evidence that Stephen was not attacking Mary, but was sitting still in one spot. Forensic experts examined the blood stains and determined that at the moment of the shot, Stephen was not moving or approaching Mary Catherine, but was calmly sitting on the bed. If he had been moving, blood would have been everywhere, not just in one corner of the sheet. This only confirmed that the accused's version was once again false. In court, faced directly with the possibility of life imprisonment and finally believing in what was happening, Mary Catherine took a risky decision to give truthful testimony in court. With tears in her eyes in front of the judge and numerous attendees, she once again portrayed Stephen Freeman as a harsh and controlling tyrant, and with certain evidence, she managed to do so. The defense stuck to the self-defense narrative, presenting the argument that erupted into a scandal between Mary and Stephen on the evening of the tragedy, where Mary fired at him in defense. Mary Catherine sorrowfully shared numerous stories from her life where Stephen had hurt her. She confessed he had repeatedly hit her face, shaken her, and threatened punishment for any minor misconduct or disobedience. Living with Stephen, I experienced all kinds of pressure imaginable: verbal insults, physical attacks, and even assault. He constantly controlled and manipulated me. He needed to know where I was, who I was with, what I was doing, how I was spending money, and even what I was eating. He drove me to despair with unreasonable jealousy. I never reported him to the police because I loved and feared him. The defense presented ample evidence to support her claims, revealing not just text messages taken from Mary's old phone, but also a correspondence that raised significant questions about who was the real tyrant and betrayer in this relationship. The text messages, dating back over a year and a half between her and Stephen, not only proved the boy's harshness, but also the girl's infidelity. Some message snippets showed Stephen indeed insulting Mary Catherine with harsh words and threatening her with repercussions upon his return from fishing. However, the reason for his anger was much more disdainful. Stephen's friends confirmed that at that moment, he was indeed very angry with his girlfriend for being unfaithful, which Mary denied. Mary Catherine shared that Stephen had forced himself on her twice, and she feared he would hurt her again on August 1st, 2018, leading her to act in self-defense. The defense called an expert and close relatives of Mary, who could attest to the domestic violence. Mary's sister, Sarah Higdon, testified, affirmatively stating she saw bruises on Mary's arm 2 weeks before the shooting. She expressed regret for not photographing it and believing Mary's explanation that it happened accidentally. A tearful Mary Higdon explained to the jury that on that fateful night, she decided to break up with Stephen once and for all, telling him to leave the house. Stephen became angry and attacked her. In defense, she grabbed the pistol from the nightstand and accidentally fired. After Mary Catherine's emotional testimony, the prosecution and defense engaged in a fierce battle, with Stephen's former friends, who had been close to Mary for years, desperately trying to idealize their deceased friend.
Thomas Skinner, Stephen's best friend, described the victim as a loyal and hard-working country boy, and Mary Catherine as an obsessive and possessive girlfriend who constantly controlled and stalked him. He claimed Mary Catherine and Stephen's relationship had become toxic over the last few years, with her threatening to end her life whenever Stephen tried to leave her, and once, after an argument, she pointed a pistol at her head in front of him. Another witness, Stephen's co-worker Alicia Varela, testified that Mary Catherine obsessively called Stephen throughout the day, even when he was at work. However, in Mary's supposedly truthful court testimony, where she framed the shooting as self-defense, she missed an important detail that prosecutor Kate Lenhard pointed out. Mary talked a lot about their interactions and how, after many years of perfect relations, they suddenly started to degrade and physically abuse each other. But she never mentioned the moment of supposed self-defense when she actually pulled the trigger. Prosecutor Kate Lenhard was not convinced by such an admission, noting that in cross-examination, Mary never once mentioned any harsh treatment by Stephen. She repeatedly asked Mary Catherine whether a woman, being safe at home, would go after her assailant late at night to bring him back home. The answer was not convincing, and the prosecutor continued her statement, embodying that dreadful scene of the accidental shooting. Kate Lenhard picked up the pistol and recreated the moment as she saw it. According to her version, Stephen came home. Then, after hearing Mary out, they argued, and he refused to have dinner. Mary, enraged, scattered the prepared food around the kitchen. Stephen, trying to avoid further conflict, went to the bedroom and sat on the bed. Likely he was waiting for her to calm down, but Mary, ready for confrontation, called out to him twice without receiving a response, walked into the bedroom, and shot him in the neck, on the left side, since he hadn't turned to face her. In her closing arguments, Kate Lenhard reminded the jury of the various stories and versions that kept changing at every police interrogation and court hearing. Mary Catherine Higdon spared no details in her emotional testimony about the alleged abuse from Stephen Freeman. But before handing the case over to the jury, Kate Lenhard desperately pleaded to consider this story not as a case of self-defense, but as a case of extreme manipulation. Despite the lost confession recording, the prosecution presented other evidence and counter-arguments. The forensic examination proved that Stephen Freeman was sitting on the bed at the moment of the shooting. Hence, he couldn't have been attacking Mary Higdon. Mary claimed they kept the gun in the house unloaded. Detectives suspected that the pistol was indeed loaded in advance on the evening of August 1st, 2018, when Mary was preparing a roast for Stephen. This was the only explanation for how grease marks not only got on part of the slide but also inside the pistol. Had Mary Catherine really loaded the pistol in advance? Colleagues, neighbors, family, friends, and acquaintances of Stephen Freeman unanimously testified that he was not prone to aggression. Prosecutors also pointed out that Mary Catherine Higdon changed details of her story at least 10 times since the first interrogation, attributing such changes to fear. Mary Catherine refused a plea deal, as she could have been facing the death penalty. The wait for the verdict felt like an eternity to her. After hearing all witnesses and the accused, the case was handed over to the jury. Just 10 minutes later, the jury was ready to announce their decision. However, 2 jurors out of 10 had doubts about some aspects of the prosecution's story. They were concerned that investigators, so eager to charge Mary Catherine with premeditated action, had not fully checked crucial facts. Questions were raised about the lack of a complete investigation into Stephen Freeman's phone, checking his text messages, and browsing history. The prosecution simply hadn't done this. Besides Mary's lies, no sufficient evidence was presented against her. The arguments presented by jurors Victor and Chris had an effect. The jury deliberated and returned a unanimous verdict: not guilty. A few hours later, Mary Catherine Higdon was free. After a lengthy deliberation, the 12 jurors concluded the following. On the first charge, malicious action, the defendant was found not guilty. On the second charge, serious action, the defendant was found not guilty. When the judge acquitted Mary Catherine Higdon on all charges, including intentional action, reckless action, assault with a deadly weapon, and carrying a weapon during the commission of a crime, many people in the courtroom were shocked. Watching the woman who took her son's life walk out of the courtroom, Jennifer Freeman could barely contain her anger towards the jurors. Everyone who supported Stephen's family was also stunned by such a verdict. After the trial ended in her favor, Mary Catherine returned home to be with her family in Griffin. Since then, she has stayed out of the limelight and is almost absent from social media, likely to avoid undue attention from the media and the public. Her Instagram profile is private, and no further details about her current whereabouts are known. It's assumed that Mary Catherine has moved on from her harrowing past to live a quiet and unnoticeable life. Stephen Freeman's mother dedicated a farewell post to her son on social media. Stephen lived a life filled with love, joy, compassion, and loyalty. Everyone was his friend, and those who enjoyed hunting and fishing with him were his closest. He had a heart of gold and a charming southern smile. Stephen showed his love for you by making you feel like you were the only person in the world, making you laugh until your stomach hurt, always smiling broadly, hugging you, and never leaving your side. These 3 simple words, "I love you," have always inspired me. So who really pulled the trigger in this story? That's a question you must answer for yourself, as all the answers in this story are evident. By analyzing and presenting the situation, it's up to everyone to decide whether Mary Catherine is guilty or if it was a tragic accident that cost a young man his life. How much do you agree with the 2 jurors who changed the course of a young woman's life, giving her a second chance? Mary Catherine likely lives a quiet life away from the spotlight now that she has managed to leave her terrible past behind.